This podcast is supported by Talkspace.
When my husband came home from his military deployment, readjusting was hard for all of us. Thankfully, I found Talkspace.
Talkspace provides professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatric providers online. Military members, veterans, and their dependents ages 13 and older can get fast access to providers, all from the privacy of their computers or smartphones.
I just answered a few questions online, and Talkspace matched me with a therapist. We meet when it's convenient for me, and I can message her anytime. It was so easy to set up, and they accept TRICARE. Therapy was going so well, my husband and I started seeing a couples therapist through Talkspace too.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, including TRICARE. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com/military. Go to Talkspace.com/military to get started today. That's Talkspace.com/military.
Hey, fellow true crime aficionados. I've stumbled upon the ultimate hidden gem, Dakota Spotlight by James Wolner. It's a revelation. Picture this. Thoroughly researched, original, and peppered with real interviews. No sensationalism here. Just gripping storytelling with heart. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you'll always want more. So cozy up and join me on the edge of your seat. Trust me, this podcast is the real deal. Start with the Mandan murders and prepare to be hooked. Let's uncover this treasure together. Listen to Dakota Spotlight.
You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together, we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Barbara Annette Anderson was born on May 19, 1954, to parents Ray and Frances Anderson. Her father, Ray, was a respected and very successful builder in Edmonds, Washington, where Barbara grew up. Barbara graduated from King's Garden High School, a religious institution, and then she married Randy McClure in San Mateo, California in June 1972, becoming Barbara McClure. They had a daughter, Jamie, together. Randy and Barbara divorced in January 1978. Despite the end of their marriage, they got along well and co-parented their little daughter, with Barbara having custody and Randy having the toddler on every other weekend and whenever else he could find time. Barbara worked in the catering department at the Olympic Hotel and had recently received a promotion. She had had a serious relationship since the breakup of her marriage, but that had come to an end. According to contemporary reporting, Barbara was enjoying her newfound freedom, independence, and the single life. She worked hard and was quiet around strangers, but was fun-loving and charismatic when you got to know her. On November 2nd, 1978, 24-year-old Barbara left her toddler daughter and went out with a male coworker, a man named Scott, whom she had casually dated in the recent past. As far as Barbara was concerned, the two were now just friends, but they continued to enter dance competitions together. That night, Scott and Barbara met Barbara's roommate, Brenda, and a married couple they were friends with, Lou and Arlene, at the Fandango Discotheque, located in the same building as the Sirloin Inn in the Lake Forest Park Shopping Center in North Seattle. The Fandango was having a dance contest with a cash prize that evening. We don't know exactly what happened at the Fandango, but it seems Barbara and Scott argued over something, and Scott left the nightclub after confirming that Brenda, Barbara's roommate, would bring her home. After a time, Barbara too wanted to leave, but Brenda wasn't ready to go. So Barbara decided to walk home. She lived 5 miles away in the 1500 block of Northeast 89th Street in Seattle. She set off on foot around midnight. It was reported at the time that when Arlene and Lou left shortly thereafter, they passed Barbara walking and pulled over and offered her a ride. This was on Bothell Way, Northeast, near Northeast 165th Street, about a half mile from the Fandango. Barbara refused to get in the car. Her roommate Brenda ended up going home with someone at the nightclub. When she arrived home on November 3rd at 7 a.m., the house was empty. There is a lot of confusion and conflicting stories about where 1-year-old Jamie was that night. Some reports are that Jamie was with her father, Randy, and she was never at Barbara and Brenda's house that evening at all. But a boy who often babysat for Barbara has reported that he did babysit for Jamie that night. Barbara left around 8 p.m., he fell asleep on the couch, and he awoke at 6 a.m. to a man telling him to go home. This story is questionable because of the large Doberman pinscher that Barbara owned, who was in the house that night and was protective around strangers. No one knows who this man might have been, or whether the babysitter might have been confusing his dates. Jamie, who was not even 2, has no recollection of the evening or who had care of her. When Barbara didn't turn up at home that day, Brenda and Scott looked for her but couldn't find her. Around 9 p.m. that evening, Brenda reported her missing. Police seemed to treat her case somewhat cavalierly as a missing persons case, likely believing that Barbara would turn up. Well, she didn't. Police downplayed her case for several days, but then something happened that elevated the urgency of the case in the eyes of the police. On November 8th, 1978, Barbara's driver's license was found in a cul-de-sac near the intersection of I-5 and I-405, reportedly by a road survey crew. This site is 10 miles from where Barbara was last seen. Of course, the license raises more questions than it answers. Why was it on the ground? Had Barbara thrown it out of a vehicle to give a hint about her location? Had someone gotten hold of her license and simply discarded it? What did it mean? Police didn't know, but everyone realized that the discovery of the license, which Barbara was known to have on her when she disappeared, was not good. Police have been actively searching for Barbara ever since. King County Sheriff's Detective Sergeant Roy Weaver was initially assigned to the missing persons case, but said that a few months after Barbara disappeared, the police halted searches for her because they had no leads. Quote from the Lake City Journal, "Western Washington is a big place. There are many places where a body can be placed. Somebody knows what happened to Barbara McClure. We would like for that person or persons to communicate with us. The fact that she may be lying somewhere is of grave importance to the family. It would relieve a lot of anguish if we were able to find the body," end quote. Barbara's sister Sharon Wright spoke with the local newspaper publication, the Lake City Journal, about 4 months after her sister went missing. She said, quote, "This is the most horrible thing you could ever possibly imagine to live through. I don't say that to be dramatic, but if she was killed, and even if it happened fast, can you imagine the terror that she went through?" Other than the driver's license, no trace of Barbara has ever been found. The primary theory in Barbara's case is that she was abducted after getting into a car with someone or being pulled into the car. Her leaving the area voluntarily is out of the question. Her family says she never would have abandoned her daughter, whose second birthday was just 10 days away. Barbara was happy and doing well, and very much looking forward to Christmas. Her friend Marva Lee Smith told the Lake City Journal, quote, "Barbara is stubborn and feisty as can be. She would not have accepted a ride from a stranger, and she would have put up a heck of a struggle against anyone who tried to grab her, end quote. In the months after she went missing, Barbara's family offered a reward of $7,000 for information leading to her recovery and $3,000 for news leading to the apprehension of her abductor. Jamie, who turned 2 years old just after Barbara went missing, was raised by her dad and stepmother with several half-siblings. A death certificate was issued for Barbara on May 28, 1982, 4 years after she vanished, so that her family could collect benefits for Jamie. Now an adult with children of her own, Jamie has focused on trying to progress her mother's case. Family members' DNA is in the CODIS Unidentified Human Remains database in case remains matching Barbara are located, but there are no Jane Does in the area who fit her description. Unfortunately, the King County Sheriff's Office has informed Jamie that they are unable to devote further resources to investigating Barbara's case at this time. So Jamie recently got a short-term billboard erected to draw attention to Barbara's case. It said, "What happened to Barbara McClure?" and included a photo and phone number for Crime Stoppers. Funding was obtained from Season of Justice. The billboard was placed on Highway 99 in Edmonds, near where Barbara lived. Jamie's cousin, Carlene Cobb, who was 7 when her beloved Aunt Barbara vanished, has been helping Jamie try to find answers. So has Jamie's friend and supporter, Kathy Lang, a former commander at the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. The three recently attended CrimeCon 2024 in Nashville to raise awareness of the case. And Jamie also has a GoFundMe to raise funds for a PI to dig into the disappearance of her mother, Barbara. When she disappeared, 24-year-old Barbara Annette Anderson McClure was 5 foot 5 inches tall and very thin, between 110 and 120 pounds. She had blue eyes and dark brown hair. She was last seen wearing rust-colored corduroy pants, a wide, striped rust and green blouse, a short black leather jacket, and tan mid-calf boots with a 2-inch heel. She was possibly carrying a brown cloth purse with a shoulder strap. Mike Morford sat down with Barbara's daughter, Jamie Stupi, to talk about her mom's case. That conversation is coming up after a word from our sponsors.
This podcast is supported by Talkspace.
When my husband came home from his military deployment, readjusting was hard for all of us. Thankfully, I found Talkspace.
Talkspace provides professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatric providers online. Military members, veterans, and their dependents ages 13 and older can get fast access to providers, all from the privacy of their computers or smartphones.
I just answered a few questions online, and Talkspace matched me with a therapist. We meet when it's convenient for me, and I can message her anytime. It was so easy to set up, and they accept TRICARE. Therapy was going so well, my husband and I started seeing a couples therapist through Talkspace too.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, including TRICARE. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com/military. Go to Talkspace.com/military to get started today. That's Talkspace.com/military.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for coming on Missing Persons to discuss your mom, Barbara's case with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. I know you're really trying to raise awareness for the case and putting effort in to see that you know what happened after all this time. Your mom's case is a really fascinating one. We do have some clues. We have some witnesses. We have some interesting stories about what happened, and we're going to get into all that. But before we do, because I can only imagine this, losing your mom changed the course of your life and the outline of your life. Can you talk a little bit about how her disappearing really affected you and changed your path in life?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It was 10 days before my second birthday when she disappeared, and I lived with her. So obviously that is immediately going to change because she never returned. So I ended up being raised by my dad and a stepmom. And my grandparents were very involved. They had me quite a bit, especially the first 6 months or so. after she disappeared, because my dad had, worked full time. So I would stay there often. And my grandparents, I mean my mom's parents. And I ended up growing up in a situation that is not fantastic. I had a rough stepmom, and they had 3 children. My dad and her had 3 kids. I ended up helping raise them. And 2 of them actually ended up living with me in their high school years. So I would say it changed the course of my life a lot. And I never felt comfortable talking about her. So there was always that mystery surrounding my life that I didn't really have access to. My dad was great with me asking questions, but there was a lot of not remembering or understanding. And then the rest of the family, my aunt talked about it, but my mom's sister, but the rest of them basically didn't talk about her. So I grew up in this life of like, what would it be like to have a mom? And now I have 5 kids, and they don't have a grandparent, a grandma specifically on that side, and haven't since my grandma died, and she was much older. So that changed. Now their course of life has changed because of that. So
Yeah, real ripple effect for
yes.
everyone.
Yes.
When I'm curious, when do you have memories of her at all? Is there anything you can think back and remember about your mom since you were so young?
I don't. The first thing when I think about her, the one memory I have is being in my aunt's bathtub, and I could literally draw out. I mean, I was 2, and I could draw out what it looks like, what the wallpaper looked like. And I remember looking at my aunt, and from what she says, it was several weeks after she disappeared. And I remember saying, when are we going to go to mommy's house? Like, when am I going back home, basically? And beyond that, I'm going to say that the trauma of her disappearance and just the life that led after that, I have very minimal actual memories of my childhood up until almost teen years, to be honest.
It's interesting the way that sort of changes your everything about your life and how it affects your childhood and stuff. When did you get to the point where because I think a lot of people maybe in your situation, when they get to be teenagers, they start having an inquisitive mind and they want to know stuff about their past. When did you start really asking questions and wanting to know more about what happened?
I went to King's High School, which is a fairly prestigious, well-known Christian school. And actually it's King's schools. I went there from 3rd grade on. And so I was pretty young meaning 3rd grade. So I was 9 in 3rd grade. And my mom also went to King's, and so did all of her friends. And they all went to King's and Westgate Chapel, the church. And so a lot of teachers and principals and secretaries and staff at this school had also been to school with my mom and my dad, and also went to Westgate Chapel, and also knew my grandparents. And so, interestingly, from that age-ish, because it really wasn't part of my life until that time period, until I was about 9 to 10 years old, because I went to school somewhere else and I wasn't really around it a whole lot, and I was too young to remember. And it's like my brain just compartmentalized that part of life. So somewhere in that 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, I started finally talking about it a little bit, because people would say, "Oh, you remind me of your mom. Oh, your laugh is like your mom's. Oh, whatever," at school. And so it kind of became, celebrity is the wrong word, but it kind of became like I was known for that a little bit at school. And to me, it wasn't personal. It was 3rd person. It was, I can't, everything was like I was talking about somebody else almost. But it became part of who I was by default, almost, because of the school I was at. And so when I became a teenager, none of that ever changed. So the principal of the school that I went to, my dad's English class in his junior year, she was the teacher. So really very close people to the situation and knowing about it. So I didn't really talk outside of there a lot because family wouldn't talk about it until Ken Gaddis became part of the picture, which was, I was about 16 at that time, to really start asking questions beyond what people were comfortable with before that in my family.
Okay. And just a little bit, if you can, help me understand your family dynamic. So your mom and dad had broken up not long before she went missing, is that correct?
They were divorced. And so the divorce finalized that same year in 78, but they had been separated since I was really young. I mean, I don't know exactly, but somewhere between 3 and 6 months, they were already separated when I was 3
Okay.
and 6 months old. Yeah.
And you have siblings. Now your siblings were not living with you when your mom went missing, correct?
So my siblings are only my dad's and my stepmom's. So I don't have
Okay.
any siblings with my mom, supposedly.
Okay. So okay. So I wanted to clarify that when we get into the part of the discussion in the show, just so I can give a little bit of a background for listeners.
Sure.
So I assume that much of what you know about your mom, you had to learn from family members, friends, people that knew her. And you mentioned they say you had her laugh and little things like that. Based on everything you learned about your mom, can you give listeners a little bit of an understanding of what she was like and what was going on in her life right before she vanished?
Sure. She was, by all accounts, outgoing and strong-willed and beautiful and would light up a room when she walked into it. She was, um, certainly got attention of men everywhere she went, to the point of it being an issue at times for friends having to like take her out of places. She was willing to stand up for what she believed or didn't believe. That kind of sums up her personality. She was a really small, petite gal. She was 5'5.5", but I think at her missing, even though it says 120 pounds, I think we're more like under 110. She was really small at that time. And she was kind of living the I'm divorced. And then after she actually got divorced, she did have a fiance as well for about a year. And so at this point, she was just single and she seemed to be kind of living it up a little bit. She was, when I was with my dad, she was going out and she would sometimes leave me with friends, but not a lot, not often, but sometimes. Um, and, and just kind of living the life that she wasn't allowed to live as a kid because of how she grew up. And so she was going to bars and going to dance clubs but she had a full-time job and she was a good worker and all of those things were still there, but it's like she was so suppressed as a child that she decided to live a little bit during this time period.
So she, is out of this divorce. She's sort of rediscovering herself as a single person. You mentioned she gets into another relationship, which we're going to talk a little bit about. But so she settles down. She's living in an apartment or a home, was it?
A home.
A home. Okay. She has a roommate, and the roommate, as we're going to get into, plays a little bit of a part in the telling of what happened, and how it's discovered that your mom is missing. And I guess that's important to go back to that day when your mom went missing, November 2nd, 1978. Can you walk us through what happened that day as best you understand it, as best we know the facts, what happened for sure?
Sure. I will probably do that in two different ways because I will tell you what the police report says and what has been written about her this entire time. And that is a pretty short story. Basically, she was taken, somebody drove her. I believe Scott, a gentleman that she was just friends with and was going to dance with that night, picked her up from her home, took her to the Fandango Disco in Lake City. Lake City Shopping Center. It was below the Sirloin Inn. And they were there for a bit, not a long time. And her and Scott were dancing and there was kind of they weren't vibing very well. They had kind of dated for a short time before that. So it was awkward. And Some people say like their testimony was like, or statement was that there was an argument, but it doesn't appear it was a real argument. More like frustration. And Scott picked up his jacket and his chair fell because he kind of did it harsh. So there wasn't like yelling and screaming, but clearly there was an issue. And Scott, the gentleman she was with, leaves. And first checks with Brenda, the roommate, to make sure that Brenda can take her home, and then leaves. And Brenda, for all intents and purposes, unfortunately, was drinking a lot in general, and seems to be really, living the high life. And my mom said at some point she was just going to walk home because she wanted to leave and Brenda didn't want to. And so supposedly my mom left and walked home 5 miles in the dark, in the what appears to be under freezing weather, in a light jacket and high heel boots. So, and that's the story. And the only thing that added to that, well, there's two pieces. One, there was another couple there, Lou and Arlene, and they left. When they left, they said they were going to go drive by, and they told Brenda they'll go drive by and give my mom a ride. And their statement was that they saw her and stopped her, and she refused a ride home. And then after that, so that was all on a Thursday night, the 2nd of November. And on the 8th of November, her driver's license was found below the freeways where I-5 and 405 interchange, on a side street, which just happened to be about a quarter of a mile at the most, as a crow flies from Scott, the gentleman she was with, his house.
Okay. So that is interesting. And thank you for clarifying it, because a lot of times when we're pulling, 40, 50-year-old news reports, a lot of stuff is inaccurate or it's not complete. So sometimes you giving a little bit of a firsthand account helps us to understand. And I think, talking about the disco a little bit, the Fandango, was that a place that she went, had she been there before? Did she know that place, or was that her first time there?
I guess I don't 100% have an answer. I believe it was something that they did. So her and this Scott gentleman, they danced together and they did competitions together. So I would assume, I guess I've never really asked that question, ironically, now that you say that, but I would assume they had been there, and the gal Arlene that was there also that night made mention of them going to a couple of different discos, but those seem to be their discos of choice, the Fandango being one of them.
And can you repeat how far away that was from her home at that point?
It was about 5 miles, and it was not a straight walk shot. It was, you had to cross freeways, and it was not an easy walk.
Okay. And this was around what time that she left there?
Supposedly about midnight.
Okay. So, in my mind, I'm replaying this. I'm picturing someone that's just left the disco, and I'm sure you mentioned it's cold. She's probably wearing some kind of disco heels or something. I just can't imagine her wanting to walk 5 miles in the cold. Was she the type of person that would walk that distance, or do you find it odd that she chose to turn down that ride, or is there any reason to believe that maybe she wasn't offered a ride? What's your opinion there about what's going on?
So here's what I have put together for that night. I don't think she ever walked home. I don't think she was seen walking. I don't believe they saw her. They were friends of Scott's. I don't know if they were saying that to protect him. I'm not sure, but I don't believe she made it out of the parking lot. She was being followed by someone that my grandfather had hired or asked to follow her and report back to him. So there was certainly a possibility someone was in the parking lot. I mean, I don't know that there was any where she would have had to have walked. I've had some people come forward and say, I lived in that area at that time. There's no sidewalk on the road. It's a main road. It's a main drag right next to Lake Washington. I mean, it's a heavily traveled road. There's no lights. There's no sidewalk. She would have had to have crossed that busy street somewhere where there's no intersection to cross. There is about a half mile down, but she wasn't necessarily there yet, supposedly, when she was seen. It just, I don't, it doesn't make sense to me, nor does it make sense to most people now that they look back. But they just took the report as what it was, you know?
So, and did they, do any follow-up with this couple that reportedly saw her and offered her a ride to verify that it was true what they were saying, or did they just sort of take their statement and move on?
They took their statement and moved on. And they have
okay.
not followed up again now, and they've had the case open for over a year now.
Wow.
I, however, have followed up.
Okay. And what did you learn when you followed up?
So I have not been able to talk to Lou, who is the gentleman that was supposedly driving, but I did speak with Arlene, who admittedly said she doesn't remember much from that time period, but she also said, I said, well, I had a list of questions and I was kind of excited to fill some gaps. And she did say, I said, what was her demeanor? What was she like when you guys found her? And she goes, oh, we didn't find her. We drove up and down the road looking for her and we never found her.
That's a big difference from
That's
saying
a big difference.
They
Yes.
talked to her and she refused to ride. Okay.
Yes.
And you had mentioned something a minute ago, and I wanted to ask you about it. You had said that your grandfather hired someone to follow her. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So in the last year and a half, I have done countless hours now, because I felt like if I didn't start now talking to people and asking questions, people were passing away, right? People are this is 45 years ago. So I have talked to well over 100 people in depth at this point. And several people, including some of her best friends of that time, and one of the pastors of that time period, that is significant because of the church being significant in my family's life. So they all said that Barbara had said that the pastor came from my grandfather, but the rest of them said that she knew she was being followed. And at first she suspected maybe my dad, only because he did not want to get divorced, supposedly. However, she found out quickly it was my grandfather, because this person would then call my grandpa and tell him where she was. And my grandfather would then call her and say, why were you here? Why were you with these people? Who's that person? Why are you in that kind of place? That's embarrassing to this family. Those sort of things.
This podcast is supported by Talkspace.
When my husband came home from his military deployment, readjusting was hard for all of us. Thankfully, I found Talkspace.
Talkspace provides professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatric providers online. Military members, veterans, and their dependents ages 13 and older can get fast access to providers, all from the privacy of their computers or smartphones.
I just answered a few questions online, and Talkspace matched me with a therapist. We meet when it's convenient for me, and I can message her anytime. It was so easy to set up, and they accept TRICARE. Therapy was going so well, my husband and I started seeing a couples therapist through Talkspace too.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, including TRICARE. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com/military. Go to Talkspace.com/military to get started today. That's Talkspace.com/military.
I want to talk a little bit more about the person we're talking about a little bit here, Scott, and based on some of these early reports in the newspaper. So I think it was mentioned that Scott was listed as someone she had gotten in an argument with, and some reports say it was a boyfriend. Some reports say it was a coworker. Did he happen to work with her?
He did. So they met
Okay.
at the Olympic Hotel in Seattle. That's how they met.
Okay. And you said they dated for a brief time, but they weren't actively dating when your mom disappeared.
Yes. And I'll I'll give you his report. He says that they were dating for a short time in September, basically, and that honestly, he got too serious in the relationship and that she was not excited about that. And she ended it quickly. And then they had gone to dinner to kind of talk about it because I think maybe he had some issue, didn't want to leave it alone if he didn't have to. And then they went and danced at this place that night. I have a little conflicting accounts about that. I have some that say she said she asked him to go dance that night because there was a money prize if they won. And he said that he asked her to go, but I don't know that that would be easily remembered either by anybody. But anyways, yes. So they were co-workers and they had dated. They were not dating, but they were there for a dance competition.
Okay. Now you said that the argument that night was just, it wasn't a serious argument, but it may have come across as more serious than it was. What was their normal everyday relationship like? Did they get along?
I guess I don't really know that, to be honest. I don't, they were together for such a short time, dating, and he seemed to have come around quite a bit on his account, but most people didn't know him. So like her best friends didn't know him unless they worked with her also. So the person that was my mom's manager at the hotel was a really good family friend. A lot of this is family dynamic issues, honestly, family things, because my grandfather actually sponsored them to come over from Norway. And so they gave my mom a job and a couple other gals from the church a job. And by all accounts, there wasn't, some people they didn't know him very well. And so there wasn't a lot of interaction with other friends from what I can tell. So I'm not sure if there's a group of people that maybe they hung out with that everybody else didn't know. I know Brenda, the roommate, came out with them a few times. It just seems like it was a really short-lived period and ended quickly. And there's not a lot of accounts of them together besides that.
Okay. Now it seems like, someone that has dated your mom, even if it's briefly, got too serious that your mom broke it off, and then is seen in an argument with her the night she goes missing. It seems like he's going to be high on the radar list to be talked to by police. How closely did they look at him and talk to him? Did he cooperate? And what was the extent of his cooperation, as far as you know?
I had read the police file about 12 years ago now. It appeared it was a few days in. Well, they shouldn't even really start getting investigated until her license was found, as far as a actual like missing person, possible homicide or something, until the license was found. So you're talking 5-6 days later now. But he did come in. It was a few days. They asked him a couple of times, but he did come in. And my dad also came in. So they gave statements and they both passed lie detector tests. So it appears that they didn't take anything very seriously, to be honest with you, but they did. Those two gentlemen were the top suspects, which would be normal. Yeah, and were cleared pretty quick. But my dad did go back for a couple other lie detector tests. That was an interesting story from my dad's side that I did not know. So,
yeah, and that's got to be, weird having your surviving parent that's, a brief suspect in your mom's case.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I honestly, now I pray every day there's nothing about that. And I believe my dad. Yes, it's odd. It's odd. And there's odd that nobody remembers anything. That's another part that's hard, is there's a lot of lack of memory in this situation, not just on my dad's part, on a lot of parts. The only person that seems to remember a lot of details is Scott. So.
Okay. So, we have the story of what happened with Scott. We have the people that supposedly offered your mom a ride, whether that happened or not, whether it's accurate. We have their story, but we also have something that happened that night, which was a reported sighting of your mom by people that knew her. And I want to make sure this isn't the same people that we've already talked about that supposedly offered a ride, or is this someone else? But there was a supposed sighting of your mom on Bothell Way near Northeast 165th Street. And this was about a half mile from the Fandango. Is this a different witness, or is this the same couple that said they offered a ride home?
It's the same couple.
It is. Okay.
Yep.
Now, this location, supposedly, if I'm not mistaken, if we've done our map work here, it seems like it's in the opposite direction of your mom's home. Is that accurate?
No, it is towards the direction. There just is no good direction, if that makes sense. So she would have left if all of that is true. Let's say she was going to walk home. She was going to go straight south, but straight south is much. She'd have to go straight south and then through neighborhoods and then under, around a freeway somehow. And so it would kind of appear that way if you looked on a map, but there, Bothell Way is a long stretch of a pretty busy to this day, a very busy road. And that's kind of the only, if she went the other direction, which you would probably go if you were leaving by car, because you'd kind of go to the freeway to get to her house. It's just, there's no good way. You can't diagonally go because it doesn't work from where she was. So it would look that way on a map, I can tell you for sure, but that really was the only way she could walk.
Okay. And so this brings me to a point that's another very interesting piece of this mystery, I think. When your mom went out that night, she left you in the care of a babysitter. Was this babysitter someone she had used before? Did she know this babysitter well?
Well, Morph, there's unfortunately conflicting stories about where I was that night. So I had a gentleman come forward and say that he was the neighbor, and he, when he was a kid, he believes he was babysitting me, and he didn't remember my mom's name, but once he realized it was me that was posting, he was like, "Oh my gosh, it is you." And he says that my mom left about 8 o'clock at night, and he fell asleep on the couch, which was normal. And in the morning, at about 6 o'clock in the morning, some gentleman woke him up and told him he could go home. However, that story is conflicting, unfortunately, because my mom told people that I was good friends of hers that owned the home she lived in. Marvelise Smith, one of her best friend, asked if they could have me because my mom was going out, and I was very close to them, her and her husband. And my mom said, "Oh, Randy's taking her." My dad. Okay. So then the police report, I verified after this gentleman came forward, I verified with the police report that supposedly I was with my dad, and we were at a dinner party that night that she disappeared with other people, and they verified that we were there until late. And then the other people, there were a handful of people there. They actually went out, and because my dad had me, he stayed there and babysat their children while they went out. And then around midnight, we went home. So I have no idea where I was that night.
Okay. And that's one of the confusing things doing a 40, 50-year-old case. You see these articles mention these nuggets, and it's hard to make sense and put them in order. We've got one story where this babysitter claims to be babysitting you, and but then there's everything seems to point that he wasn't really babysitting you, that you were with your family.
Yes.
So could it be a case of this babysitter had babysat you before and he's misremembering the day, something like that?
That's what some people believe for sure. There's especially, and I say some people, meaning people that were detectives before in life, so they kind of understand this world, right? And so Kathy is my friend who was with me at CrimeCon. Kathy believes that he is probably remembering a different day. And because this was such a significant event, that it stuck in his brain as the same time period. I mean, he was 14. So that's, I mean, at this point, I don't, and unfortunately, you know, my dad is really honest about it. And another part of it that I have a hard time with, again, like I feel like, I mean, I had a tragedy 13 years ago, I guess 11 years ago, and I remember every piece of it still. I'm thinking, well, am I going to forget that as time goes on? And in 45 years, will I not remember all those details? I don't know yet. But what I know is that I find it odd that people have zero recollection of all these things, but it's across the board. People have a hard time remembering. So like my dad, he doesn't remember that night at all. However, that same detective, and I've heard this from other people, has said, the thing about that is that night is not significant to my dad because nobody found out my dad was missing that night. So he didn't find out for days after that she was missing. So to him, the night she went missing wasn't a significant night in his brain. The fact that when he found out she was missing was more significant.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the possibility, like him, he's literally, he's like, I mean, he's very honest about it. He's like, I honestly don't remember. Like, I don't remember where we were. I'm like, Dad, just think of whose house were we having dinner at? And he's like, I have no idea. I genuinely don't remember. And apparently that would not be out of the ordinary in this situation when it's not like social media where you find out that night, you know?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's frustrating because the interesting part of this babysitter's story is that he claims that at 6 a.m. the morning after your mom went missing, he was awoken by a man who told him that he could go home, and he left. That seems like an interesting thing. But again, is he misremembering it?
Right.
Has his mind maybe added some details over, all these years?
Well,
Who
right.
knows?
And the significant part is that every other time he was woke up at midnight or so
Mhm.
to go home, right? So you're talking about a significant difference in the story that he didn't get woke up till the morning. And, he says, I mean, he has details that are very strong, right? That it was that day.
Mhm.
So I struggle. I will also say that Scott, the gentleman she was with that night, also said that he believes it is basically impossible that somebody was there that night because he's positive that nobody was there when he picked me up, that there was not somebody babysitting me and that I was not there.
Okay. Now, and can you just recap again? Did you say you don't know for sure if this babysitter had ever really babysat, or is it something he just claims?
No, he had definitely babysat. His mom
Okay.
was been in the papers. Toey is the last name. His mom was even asked just as a neighbor in one of the papers. She's quoted in the article as saying, my son had even babysat for her, but she also specified, but not that night, which I thought was a little different. But anyways.
So the one thing we know for sure is that the next morning, the roommate, your mom's roommate, comes back to the house, and it's quiet, it's empty, your mom's not there. How did she figure out that something was wrong, and how did she get concerned? And I'm saying she as a roommate, and correct me if I'm wrong, was it a female or a male
Yes.
roommate?
Female, Brenda.
Okay.
And she had gone home with someone that night and came home in the morning at about 7 o'clock or so, between 7 and 7:30, and realized she wasn't home. Again, the fuzzy details was her car in the front of the house? I don't really know that. Nobody seems to remember. She had a pretty significant, I mean, it was a 76 Camaro, maroon Camaro. So it was something that most people notice. So what the story is, but again, this is just a story because Brenda has now passed away, unfortunately. But Scott said that Brenda called him in the morning and said, Barb didn't make it home. And so then Scott drove over to the house and they looked all over supposedly for like address book to call family or whatnot, and supposedly couldn't find anything. So at that point, they were pretty clear that nobody was there. There was also a very large German Shepherd, very large Doberman Pinscher somewhere around there as well, who didn't have anybody watching him. So I'm not sure where that dog was, but another issue probably.
Yeah, and actually, I was going to ask you about the Doberman because I figure if anybody's coming and going in that house, Dobermans can be protective, maybe
Very.
frightening strangers off. But if someone's coming in and out of the house, you think that dog could be protective. Then again, we don't know that your mom ever made it home. It was just an interesting point about the dog. So Brenda eventually reports your mom missing later that night.
Yes.
And what was her initial concern? What did she tell police, and what do the police reports say about that first time that she's reported missing?
So it's really vague. It was about 9 p.m. at night, according to the report. Scott doesn't believe it was till midnight because they had to be 24 hours. And since she left around midnight, that's what he believes. He stayed at the house with Brenda that whole time. And then Brenda called. The interesting thing is that literally the first page of her report is, essentially King County saying, well, I guess we have to take this case because Lake City Police don't want it and Seattle Police Department doesn't want it. And so we've inherited it and we don't want it, but here we go, basically.
Wow. And that's sort of how the report starts off.
Yep. That's how it starts off. Yep. It's very much of clear that nobody wanted to, whether it appeared that she was a prostitute walking, there's a lot of scenarios that say like, well, yeah, they didn't want to, have a case that made them look bad like that. Who knows? But, at that time, there were a lot of those kind of things happening. And so if she was walking on the road like that at that late, it looked bad. I don't know.
Yeah. And that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence to starting off an investigation, reading that in a report. So let's jump forward a few days. You mentioned it earlier. Your mom's driver's license is found near the intersection of I-5 and 405 by a road survey crew. This is 10 miles, correct, from where she was last seen? Am I off on that or accurate?
No, you are accurate. It is 10 miles away on a cul-de-sac that doesn't drive all the way through in a odd place. It back then, which of course I'm, only 47, but papers or licenses weren't laminated like they are now. So it's basically a piece of paper, a thick piece of paper. So it certainly wouldn't flown, that a lot of people said stuff like, whoa, she was taken to Canada for trafficking. And there's all these things that were happening during that time that there's these rumors. However, how far away from the freeway her license was, it would not have flown it's basically impossible. So the story is that a road construction crew was working there during that time, and one of them saw her license sitting there and happened to pick it up and said that he recognized the picture and then called the police. However, that's not the only story. So let me know when you want me to tell you that.
Okay. So let me ask you a follow-up here. Missing I'm assuming her license was supposed to be in your mom's wallet or her purse, but those items were not found, correct?
So all reports say that she had a cloth purse on her. However, Scott says he can remember vividly her taking her license and a $5 bill out and putting it in her breast pocket of her coat. So nothing else was found. No purse. Her purse has never been found, supposedly. It was not at the house. It is non-existent.
Okay. And then, so what is this alternate story about the finding of the license?
So last summer, I, in my finding and looking of, talking to people, I had the opportunity to talk to a family member who said that, and I like to preface this, I'm not leading when I ask questions to people. I just say, tell me about that time period. Tell me about my family. Tell me about my mom. Tell me what you remember about that, during this time period, to try to keep it their memories without me knowing that it's a long time ago. I don't want to lead their thoughts in any way. So this person said, I was working a lot, but I do remember getting a phone call from Ray Anderson, who is my grandfather, my mom's dad. And he told us to meet in this specific area. And if you know Ray Anderson, you don't question Ray. So we all, I say we all, a handful of men, met at this odd location on the side of the freeway. And didn't know what we were looking for, but we were looking, and someone found her license.
So it wasn't just a crew out randomly doing work that came across it. Supposedly they were sort of told to look around in that location.
That's what that's their account. Yes.
Okay. Which if a true account, if that's what really happened, that would be odd that they randomly select this place to go looking and just so happen to find your mom's driver's license there.
It would certainly not be by accident. There's no way.
Yeah. And that's very, very strange. Now, is this the same grandfather that was having your mom followed?
Yes.
Okay. And is this your grandfather on your mom's side or your dad's side?
Mom's.
Okay.
So the family is kind of a significant part of the story. So when you want me to get into that, let me know.
Yeah, please, because I think that sort of ends really I think at this point, the clues that there are to be found. So if you can talk a little about that.
So my family so Ray and Frances Anderson are of their day, I should say. So 50s, 60s, 70s were well known, well respected. My grandfather was a builder. He built over 1,000 homes, and which is not as significant if you know about building nowadays, but back then it's extremely significant because every home was a custom home. They weren't track homes back then. So, you would buy a section of land and you would build, some homes, you would sell some lots to other people to build. It was just done differently back then. So he built over 1,000 homes, custom homes for people. To this day, his homes still resell and they post Ray Anderson resale. And he hasn't built a home in 40 years. So it's a long time. So he was very well known, very respected, to the point where in the front of the Seattle Times, which is the biggest newspaper in Washington State, I have pages of the front page of the Seattle Times of my mom, my aunt, and my uncle on a couch in one of his model homes, right? Just with a big interview on the front of the Seattle Times. So well-known man, well-connected man, well-respected in that world man. Also, or the part that becomes significant for my mom, and I believe, is he built Westgate Chapel, which is, to this day, I believe, the biggest church in Snohomish County, and rivals the biggest in other area. I mean, it's a big church, and it's right downtown Edmonds, which is where my grandparents, it's that whole circle of people kind of all between Philadelphia Church in King County and Westgate Chapel, kind of all were in that area. So my grandfather actually built Westgate Chapel, and his brother was the first pastor of Westgate Chapel. And our families, there were 43 founding members of Westgate Chapel. They were called the Westgaters, literally. The rules were written by my grandfather, and they, to this day, I have a copy of them. They are strict, and you were expected to act a certain way, dress a certain way, be a certain way. These kids, my grandparents' kids, were not allowed to even go to a skating rink or a bowling alley because of the music they were playing, and it was from the devil. And very strict. You were expected to act a certain way all the time. And as I've already told you, my mom was not fitting in that mold, especially by her quote unquote behavior from as my grandfather would put it. And the choices she was making were basically were embarrassing him, and not something that fell in line with what they were supposed to do. So that was hard, which would be why he was having her followed, I believe, to at least try to get in the middle of that and stop her from her choices.
So you think that his interest in following her was basically to protect the family name and reputation and that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how do you think it ties in? Again, I'm putting you on the spot here, but
Okay.
how do you think that ties into, if it ties into him calling a group of guys together to go looking for a driver's license out in this cul-de-sac area where it was found?
So, if we would have had this conversation a week ago, I would have told you that my grandfather was probably a suspect in what happened to her. Or one of them, one of the few that you would look at. I have since probably think that's not the case, but in this specific instance, what my grandpa said or asked of people is what was done. You didn't question him. I have heard that statement from dozens of people, family, not family, Westgaters, not Westgaters, anybody who knew him. If he said, this is what I want you to do, you did that. And why did you do that? Out of fear. People were afraid. They were afraid to question him, afraid to not do what he asked. There was a family that he stopped their wedding at several different churches by threatening the churches. I mean, he had that kind of power back then. And so when someone says he told us to go be at this area at this time, you just did what he said. You just went. You didn't question. You didn't say, that's weird. That's way far away from where she was. Why would we go there? That didn't happen. You just went and did what he said.
Yeah, very, very odd that, this spot, if this is accurate, if this person is remembering this since they relayed this information to you, but if they're remembering accurately that he sort of said, hey, everybody meet at this spot, we're going to look for a driver's license, that's very, very strange. And would definitely warrant some further digging, I assume.
You would think.
Yeah. So, and I guess since the license itself was the most important thing that was found, that might be a clue in the case. Where is it today?
I would love to know. It is non-existent.
Yeah, it was lost by police. Is that correct?
Apparently.
Wow. And that might have had fingerprints or DNA or whatever on it that might have held some clues.
That's what I would think. That would have been a very nice piece of the puzzle, because since that's all there is.
Wow.
This podcast is supported by Talkspace.
When my husband came home from his military deployment, readjusting was hard for all of us. Thankfully, I found Talkspace.
Talkspace provides professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatric providers online. Military members, veterans, and their dependents ages 13 and older can get fast access to providers, all from the privacy of their computers or smartphones.
I just answered a few questions online, and Talkspace matched me with a therapist. We meet when it's convenient for me, and I can message her anytime. It was so easy to set up, and they accept TRICARE. Therapy was going so well, my husband and I started seeing a couples therapist through Talkspace too.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, including TRICARE. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com/military. Go to Talkspace.com/military to get started today. That's Talkspace.com/military.
In 1982, a death certificate was issued for your mom. And this was, I guess it was reported so that your family could use the funds to take care of you. But she was declared dead back in 1982. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, you mentioned earlier you grew up, you started asking questions, you started digging, and I could tell by my conversation with you that you've continued digging. And I know your mom's case has been talked about on some online forums like Web Sleuths and stuff. There, and sometimes not everything's accurate on there, but there was one specific detail I saw on Web Sleuths that reported that your mom was specifically abducted near Sheridan Beach. It was almost stated as if it was fact.
Right.
Is that something that police believe to be accurate, or is this person just throwing that out there as if it's a fact and, without anything to back that up?
It's interesting to read. I find it interesting because I think nowadays, well, I know nowadays police wouldn't say this stuff, right? They wouldn't say, we believe she's been abducted and murdered, but that's literally in a couple of the newspapers. And the 165th where that street comes from, it's a cross street, and at the next block down of that cross street is Sheridan Beach. So that has been quoted by the police, not because they found anything, but because that's where she was last seen, supposedly, by the couple, and that's right by Sheridan Beach.
Okay. And at the end of the day, there is no evidence, as far as we know, that she was abducted or whether she got into a vehicle willingly with somebody. I don't think there's anything that can tell us that one way or the other, correct?
Correct. There's no evidence of any kind. There was nothing left or lost, or no eyewitness of her getting into a car or struggle of some kind. Nothing. The only other thing that was significant about that specific night is so back then there was no 911, right? It wasn't brought here until 81, but there was a rape hotline, and someone made a phone call. I don't even know that I've told this, actually. There was a phone call from a Barbara saying that she was raped, and then hung up the phone. And it was the issue with it is that it was the other. So if you look at her home, it was, I think, a mile from her home, the opposite direction. And so not a lot of merit was given to it. But anyways, it was noted that had happened.
So just so I am understanding, somebody calling themselves Barbara called into this hotline and said that she had been raped. Did she give any other identifying information?
No.
Okay.
No. And then she said, and then the end of the call was basically that somebody was coming, and she hung up the phone. So
Okay.
there's nothing else about it. There's no other, but that's the only other thing that happened that would have her name attached to it.
And when did that call come in?
It was after midnight. There probably was a specific time. I just don't recall, but it was after midnight.
But this is after midnight on the night your mom went missing, basically.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting, because how many, it's not proof that it's your mom, but
right
at that time of night, on the night when somebody named Barbara goes missing, what are the odds that a Barbara's going to call into a rape hotline?
I would think it would be fairly significant, which I'm sure is why it's noted, but nothing was investigated about that. So
wow. And I don't know if it was common practice back then, or even if they had the technology. Was there any way to trace where that call came from, or anything else about the call that could give a clue?
Yeah, it was traced to a 7-Eleven. So it was traced to a 7-Eleven that doesn't exist now, but anyways, was on the other side of her house from where the Fandango was, at least. So, yeah, the location would be, according to the police, hard to be her. Obviously, if she was driven somewhere, it's a different story, but.
Yeah, but did the police even talk to anyone at the 7-Eleven just to say, hey, did you see anyone in here using the phone?
Not that I know, not that I'm aware of, not that was in the file.
Wow. Okay. It's a very interesting, the timing and the name and everything is certainly interesting.
They essentially they basically treated it as a missing person case until her license was found.
Wow.
And because she was reported missing on a Friday night, but went missing Thursday, and no police wanted the case, essentially nothing was done for days.
Which is the crucial time when you need to get rolling on stuff.
That's what I hear.
Wow. So you had a detective, John Free of the King County Sheriff's Office. He was or is assigned to your mom's case. Is he still the head of the case?
So he is still assigned the case. However, if you email or call him, you get a message that says he will be out indefinitely. and will not be available to phone or email. And so I forwarded that to his sergeant, because they're saying it's an open case, right? You can't get copies of any files. You can't get anything from them.
Mhm.
And so clearly he is out, maybe medically, whatever, for some reason. And so I said, I had a question. That was my question about what the report says about where I was that night. And then, I said, also, is my mom's case being reassigned? Because if it's an open case, if it's an open active investigation, as they have said and written to people, I assume it's going to be reassigned, right? And he said, nope, it's going to stay with John, as I have nobody else to assign it to.
Wow. So basically, you checking as a family member, just calling in to check to see what's going on in the case, reaching out, you get basically a message that says, I'm not around, can't answer your questions. So you can't even really get any answers to anything to figure out what's going on with the case.
Right.
So I know you've turned to a mutual friend of ours, Cloyd. Tell us a little bit about Cloyd and what he's doing to help you in your mom's case.
Sure. Actually, how it actually happened was I was blessed to have someone come forward. They had joined my mom's Facebook group, and they had watched it for a little while, a couple weeks, and she was an investigative reporter, and she finally contacted me and said, basically, hey, I've been following the case. I've read up on it. Here's who I am. I'm not some fuddy-duddy fake person. I've made close friends with this gentleman. He's on the East Coast. However, he's a private investigator. He's an ex-cop. And he is, I've talked to him. I asked him if it was okay if I passed on your information, which is much nicer than a lot of the messages I will get now with a lot of crazy people. And she said, here's his phone number. Basically, I'm giving you the short version, but here's his phone number. Give him a call. He's also part of this organization that does, it's a newer nonprofit that pays for people to get a private investigator. And that place is Investigations for the Missing is what it's called. And it's over by you, actually. Anyways, so this gentleman, I spoke to him on the phone. We had a great conversation. He basically said, wow, this case is significant in the sense that we really need to have somebody who, one, has a reputation, has a police background, people will respect, hopefully, and, meaning police. And because it's going to be a little rougher than just an average cold case that the police are like, yeah, if you can solve it, great. That's not going to be the case here. And so he said, we don't know if we have the funds for this, but I'm going to be really picky about the person we find. And so I'm just going to start. It may take a while to find that right person. But, in the meantime, you got to fill out this paperwork. I'll send it to you, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So a week goes by. Actually, a few days go by. He ends up calling me and says, hey, you will not believe this, but I made contact with this gentleman. You cannot say who he is right now, blah, blah, blah. Well, now obviously Cloyd has put his name out there as being on the case as himself. And so now I can, but it's Cloyd Steiger, and Cloyd is, for all intents and purposes, fairly famous in his own right. And he according to Merle Carner, who is also a retired police detective, he is one of the best homicide detectives in the country. And we're hoping because of that, he agreed to take the case, basically, and get paid less money, all of those things, right? Because of course these people can't, this nonprofit is, pays you until the money runs out. Right. So, and so we're hoping that doesn't happen, but my friend did start a GoFundMe to help pay for stuff like that. So hopefully that will be something that will help. But, honestly, he was willing to take the case, and he happens to know a lot of the same people that I know. So that's super helpful because it's super local for him. And, he has just started looking into it, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, Claude's a really good guy to have on board with you. So I'm excited for you to have someone like that at your side, and he knows a lot of the old timers that may have been back working on the case or around when the case was there. So I think you've got a good ally in him to help you figure out what he can uncover and see if it helps move the case along.
Yes.
Be interesting to see what he's able to find. So I recently you went to CrimeCon and I guess made it your mission to go there and talk about your mom's case. Tell us a little bit about going there and what went into it and what did you do when you got there?
So CrimeCon is something I knew nothing about, not a thing, and I didn't even know they existed. And then some gal contacted me who actually, we had a couple of mutual friends. Her husband actually grew up with my husband's family. So anyways, and she said, I'm going to this conference. I'm going to this CrimeCon thing. Like, and I'm thinking it's like, my husband's like, is it Comic-Con? You know? Um, didn't really understand what it was, but whatever it was made me think, I should do this. I don't know what that looks like or what it means or what it's going to be like, but I had my two other partners in crime. One is my cousin, and the other is Kathy, who is a ex-sheriff. And I said, will you guys come with me? And I don't know what this is going to look like, but we made a bunch of posters and we, went our way. And it was an experience, overwhelming for someone in my position. The people had already, that's where I met you, right? But people had already known my mom's story. So that was really intriguing for me. And I felt, it's in Tennessee. It's across the country. I'm in Washington State. And it was across the country for me. And I was exhausted emotionally after all of the conversations and talk, because how often do you have 3 days of dealing, in that situation? But because it's personal for me, it was just absolutely overwhelming. I will tell you that. But great to talk to all the professional podcasters and people that do this for a living all the time. I even got to talk to a gentleman that worked for a coroner's office. And even that was questions for me because of the fact that my mom's death certificate was given so soon after she went missing, on and on. So I found out a lot of information.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to network and meet people, like yourselves that are going through the same thing. They've lost a family member, they're looking for them. They've been looking for them for a long time. Helps you to sort of navigate, what resources there are and things like that. So it's definitely a worthwhile event for someone that's in your shoes, that's looking to bring attention for a case or find out, how to go about progressing in the case. So I was glad to meet you there. I'm glad you did it, and hopefully you made some good contacts from that are going to help you. You mentioned the GoFundMe, trying to raise that money too. Can you tell listeners a little bit about that, where they can find that, so they can, if they're able to, they can contribute to that?
Sure. There's a Where is Barbara McClure Facebook page, Instagram, TikTok. I'm not as savvy on the Instagram and TikTok yet because I don't understand it really well, but there's a flourishing Facebook page, Where is Barbara McClure? And it is pinned on that page. And any help would be amazing because this gets expensive. I did not really understand fully what it meant to take on this, but we've done a billboard that was donated, but just this process of like doing things long term, like another billboard in the area, or that's like $8,000 to $10,000 here. It's expensive. And so that would be super helpful if anybody would be willing to donate to that. We'd like to set one right outside my Uncle Ken's house in Seattle if we could, and have him stare at that every day and wonder why it's there. The things you'd like to do to get out there, but you just financially, it's already been thousands and thousands of dollars just in a year,
Yeah, it all takes a toll, when you've got different costs for different things, and you have to figure out where that money is going to go. And so hopefully people can help contribute to that if they're able to. So I've got a few random questions here, just things that I needed to ask. I'm just sort of asking them here at the end.
Yeah.
So the first thing regarding the home where your mom was
Mhm.
living with Barb, with her roommate.
Mhm.
Was that ever searched for any signs of a struggle, any signs that your mom made at home, maybe uh blood, that kind of stuff?
Not that I understand or can tell. The accounts, the weird accounts that are about the house that I have are, one, when Marva Lee, the owner of the home, went over there. Um, Two, she doesn't can't remember exactly, but either 2 or 3 days. It was that weekend, right? So she went missing on Thursday, was reported Friday. Sometime that weekend, she showed up to what is her home, and my mom was renting the home. And my mom's brother, Ken, was there taking clothes out of the house. So that's an account from the home that we have, but there really is very little talk about the house at all, honestly.
Okay. And she may not have ever made it back to the home, but it would
Right.
be, I thought it'd be interesting to see if there's any kind
Yes.
of sign of a struggle or any sign that she may have made it home. Um,
It does
Now,
not appear that they did anything in the house.
okay, okay. Now, also, I know that you've been keeping an eye to see if there's any remains that have ever been found that might match your mom, but I think you've said publicly that there were no remains in King County or Snoqualmie County that match your mom's description. Is that correct?
That's correct. They actually, when the Green River Killer was caught and was giving information, that was the only one and only time in 45 years that King County has contacted me about my mom's case. And it was basically just, hey, we have a few remains that, possibly fit her description. We don't think it is her, but just in case, can we have some DNA? Luckily, my grandparents were both still alive, so I had them take their DNA so that it was an exact match. So her DNA is in all of the CODIS and all of those systems that are, necessary to get that out there. But so far, nothing.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about, and this may have been stuff you already talked about, but I just want to make sure we're not leaving anything out. So you have said publicly too that you've learned some things about your grandfather. Was this that what you already mentioned, that he was having your mom followed and that kind of stuff?
Yes, but I will say that so when I was lucky enough a week ago, there is this is the first time I've talked about it now. There was a missing file that people have heard about and learned about from a gentleman by the name of Ken Gaddis, who started contacting me at 16 years old and um, appeared to be hiding the fact that he was friends with my uncle, who is also what I would consider a suspect in this case. And he would relay stuff back to Ken Anderson, my mom's brother, when I would talk to him, unbeknownst to me. I had no idea they were friends. And there was a file that this gentleman had on his desk always. And he would say, anytime you want to come, it's here. It's always on my desk. It never leaves. My goal is to solve this case before I die because it's always been part of my, something I've been interested in and wanted to help with. And it was always really exciting to me. And when he passed, I approached the family and did not get a response. And then over the last year, from a year and a half ago, until about, I don't know, 8 months ago, we were asking the family for the file and they kept saying there was no file. I have since been given a email from the family asking me to not talk about their dad, which I can fully appreciate. However, he is a part of this story. And since I did the podcast and brought his name into it and said there was this file, a week ago, the file surfaced. And in this file, which is really, really interesting, is handwritten information and even news articles that my grandfather hand wrote on the side where they were from and his initials, and they're in blue ink, the originals that he had. There is no way that Ken Gaddis would have this file. And in that file, there are things like letters from the IRS saying that they can't give my grandpa the document or the check, like her checks that she would have her return, right? Or or information from her work about a insurance policy that she had that they wouldn't release to my grandpa until he had the death certificate. So original documentation from my grandfather, he would not have given to Ken Gaddis. I promise that. It was clearly taken by Ken Anderson and given to Ken Gaddis. And that stuff clears up a lot of the questions as to things my grandfather did, like, why would you declare your daughter dead? Why'd you stop looking for her? Which still has never been answered and won't. But why'd you declare her dead? You know, so few years after she went missing. Families just don't do that unless it's a financial issue, where my grandparents had money. So there's no financial issue. That's not the excuse. So there were a lot of questions about that were uncomfortable and didn't make sense, that now make sense because of that file. If I would have had that file a year ago, there would have been a lot less looking and digging into my grandfather, I believe.
I'm curious too, because we've talked about your grandfather so much. What was his relationship like with your mom?
They did not talk.
So, and when you say not talk, like at all, they were like completely out of communication?
I don't know that I would say that 100%, but it's the family dynamic is so, with my mom in particular, is so much so that, like, in contacting other people about them, basically no one even knew she had a brother and sister, unless they were super close to her and were close to her in high school. They did not even know she had two siblings. So Ken, her brother, and her never had a good relationship, always hated each other. Well, I should say Ken always hated her, and always disgruntled by her life choices and who she married, and hated my dad and was awful to my father, and awful to everybody that had anything that had to do with my mom. And so between my uncle and my grandfather, it was always tense. So I think she always talked to her mom, my grandma, but it was kind of she came around for family events, but not anything besides that, is when it comes to my grandfather and my uncle as well.
Wow. Okay. And that's, always important, because if you're looking for any, connections to interest by your grandfather and why he's having her followed, if he's having guys, if it really happened that he had these guys looking in this area for driver's license, that relationship seems to become more important.
Yes.
Is there any kind of motive there? Is there any kind of indication that he could have had some involvement? And as you mentioned, I think earlier, that you don't feel that way as much now as you did before, because you think this file that has surfaced has given you some more answers. And do you think it shows that your grandfather was keeping up with her case because he wanted to see it solved, or because he was keeping tabs on it?
It would appear to me, based on what was in there, that so the things that made me question him in the past, especially over the last year and a half, I find out information like he's declared her dead, he's done this, he's done that, there's stuff in the file about him, information about America's Most Wanted and contacting them, and it would look to me like it was more about possibly protecting me than it was protecting himself, which is what I would have thought, what it was looking like before, where now with that information, it looks different that way. I think it's important to note, or to say that, I have an aunt and an uncle in this situation that were really close to this situation at the time. My uncle won't even talk to me. Won't talk about her, won't talk to his own daughter now because of her asking questions about my mom. He will not answer me. I have called, I have left messages. He will not talk to me about it, which seems a little odd.
Yeah. Seems like it's really, the whole case is just really, we mentioned earlier that it's a ripple effect, and it's really affected your family now.
Yes.
In a number of ways.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you for coming on and discussing the case with us and walking us through this. It's a lot of information, and, hopefully after all this time, a lot of people have passed away, witnesses forget stuff, but you've got somebody like Cloyd at your side digging, and I hope that you're somehow able to make some progress, and we're going to help spread the word and let people know that the case is still unsolved.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate all the help I can get and getting the word out there. Somebody knows something, right?
Yeah, hopefully they do the right thing and come forward if they have information.
They will. It'll happen.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/missingpersonspod. We're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. And of course, you can find us and contact us through our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.